Nvidia used to own 95% of China's artificial intelligence chip market. 95. Today, by its own CEO's admission, it owns basically zero. Not shrinking, not under pressure, zero. And the company that took that market from the most valuable chip maker on earth is one that the United States spent years trying to bury. Huawei. The same Huawei that got cut off from the world's best chip factories, banned from buying the machines everyone else uses, and written off as finished. That company is now on track to control 60% of China's artificial intelligence chip market by the end of this year. And the strangest part is how it happened. Because Huawei did not win by building a better chip than Nvidia. In almost every way that matters, its chips are still worse. It won anyway. And once you understand how, you will see why this is one of the most important stories in technology right now. This is the story of how the most powerful chip company in the world got locked out of the biggest AI market in the world, and how a company nobody bet on walked in and took its place. It matters because AI runs on these chips. The models everyone talks about, the assistants, the agents, all of it depends on a specific kind of processor that only a handful of companies on Earth can make. For years, one company dominated that business so completely that it became one of the most valuable companies in human history. That company is Nvidia, and China was one of its biggest customers, worth something like a quarter of its data center business. Then, almost overnight, that revenue turned into a write-off. To understand why, and to understand who caught the falling knife, we have to start with a decision made in Washington. Because this story does not begin with a chip. It begins with a ban. Back in 2019, the United States government placed Huawei on something called the Entity List. In plain terms, that meant American companies could no longer sell their technology to Huawei without special permission. Over the next few years, the restrictions kept tightening, and they spread from Huawei to Chinese chip makers more broadly. The goal was simple: keep the most advanced computing power out of China's hands, because whoever has the most computing power has an edge in building artificial intelligence. And the single most important tool in that whole fight is a machine. It is called an extreme ultraviolet lithography system, built by a Dutch company, and it is the machine that makes the most advanced chips on the planet possible. China cannot buy one. Huawei cannot buy one. The Chinese factory that builds Huawei's chips cannot buy one either. So on paper, this should have been the end of the story. No advanced machine means no advanced chips, means no serious competition. That is exactly what the policy assumed. But here's where it gets interesting. Because Huawei did not stop, it just changed the question it was asking. Instead of asking, how do we build a chip as good as Nvidia's, it started asking something much smarter. What if we do not need one that good? Nvidia's chips stayed more advanced. Every analyst agreed on that. And yet, within a few years, Nvidia's share of the Chinese market began to collapse. To see why, you have to understand the trick Huawei pulled, and it starts with a problem the company could not hide from. Here was Huawei's problem, stated plainly. Its best AI chip, called the Ascend, was simply not as good as Nvidia's best, not close, on raw performance. Nvidia's chips are built on more advanced manufacturing, they run faster, and they use less power to do the same work. Huawei's chips are made by a Chinese factory called SMYC on an older process, without that forbidden lithography machine, which means they run hotter, draw more electricity, and fall behind on pure speed. If this were a straight race between one chip and one chip, Huawei loses every time. So Huawei stopped racing one chip against one chip. Instead of trying to build a single processor that could beat Nvidia's single processor, Huawei's engineers asked what happens if we take a lot of our weaker chips and wire them together into one giant system. This is the core of the whole strategy, and it has a nickname in the industry: brute force. If one of your chips is half as good, use twice as many. If it is a third as good, use 3 times as many. Lash hundreds of them together with extremely fast connections, and the cluster as a whole can rival, or even beat, a cluster built from Nvidia's superior chips. Huawei built exactly this, a system it calls Cloud Matrix, packing 384 of its chips into a single cluster. And on paper, That cluster can push out more raw computing power than the equivalent Nvidia system it was designed to challenge. It uses far more electricity to do it, sometimes around 4 times as much. But here's the thing the headlines miss. In China, electricity is cheap. Industrial power there costs a fraction of what it costs in the United States. So the one weakness of the brute force approach, the enormous appetite for power, is exactly the weakness that matters least on Huawei's home turf. You are trading efficiency for capability, and in China, that is a trade worth making. But there was still a second, deeper insight, and this is the one that really tilted the board. Huawei made a bet about where the AI market was actually going. There are 2 big things you do with an AI chip. The first is called training, which is teaching a model in the first place, and it is brutally demanding. The second is called inference, which is running that model after it is built, every time it answers a question or performs a task. Training needs the absolute best chips money can buy, but inference is lighter work, and Huawei bet that inference is where the real demand would explode, as AI assistants and automated agents spread into everyday use. And here is why that bet was so clever. On inference, the gap between Huawei's chips and Nvidia's chips shrinks dramatically. You do not need the world's most advanced processor to run a model well enough. You just need one that is good enough, cheap enough, and available. Huawei's Ascend is all 3. Then came the moment that made Nvidia genuinely nervous. DeepSeek, one of China's most important AI companies, released a major new model. It was trained on Nvidia chips, but for inference, for the part that actually serves users at scale, DeepSeek ran it on Huawei's hardware. Nvidia's own CEO had reportedly warned that a scenario where a major model shows up on Huawei first would be a horrible outcome. And here it was, happening. Wait, because it gets bigger. Huawei's AI chip revenue is projected to hit $12 billion this year, up around 60% from the year before. It is aiming to produce hundreds of thousands of its newest chips, and behind Huawei, a whole line of other Chinese chip makers is filling in. This was no longer one company's comeback, it was an entire domestic industry standing up. Which brings us to the twist that should have saved Nvidia, and somehow did the opposite. For a moment, it looked like Nvidia was going to win China back. Late last year, the United States did something dramatic. It approved the sale of Nvidia's H200 chip to China. This was a big deal because the H200 is the most powerful AI chip ever cleared for export there, roughly 6 times more capable than the stripped-down chip China had been allowed to buy before. The door that had been slammed shut suddenly cracked open. Nvidia restarted production. Chinese customers placed orders. On paper, Nvidia had its market back. Except it did not. Because the moment the chips tried to actually move, they hit a wall that nobody on the outside saw clearly at first. 2 governments gave 2 contradictory orders. The United States said any Nvidia chip a Chinese company buys must stay inside China and be used only there. But Beijing, at the very same time, told its own tech companies to keep Nvidia chips out of their core domestic operations and lean on homegrown chips instead. Think about what that does. One side says these chips can only be used in China. The other side says, do not use these chips in China. Caught between those 2 rules, the H200 shipments froze in customs, a stalemate. The chips were approved, ordered, and stuck. Reports later indicated Nvidia actually halted H200 production for China as the deadlock dragged on. And America's own Commerce Secretary confirmed the punchline. Despite all the approvals, Nvidia still had not actually sold the chips into China because Beijing was blocking them on purpose. This was the peak of the whole drama, the most powerful chip in the world, cleared for sale, wanted by customers, and unable to cross the border. And every day it sat stuck. Huawei sold more. Every stalled shipment was a customer who could not wait, and there was exactly one company ready to catch them. So the approval that was supposed to rescue Nvidia's China business instead handed Huawei the clearest runway it had ever had, and that runway leads somewhere that reshapes the entire picture. This is how a company with weaker chips ended up in the stronger position, not by out-engineering Nvidia, but by being available when Nvidia was not, and by being backed by a government determined to make it the default. The numbers tell the story. According to one major research firm, Nvidia's share of China's AI chip market is expected to fall to around 8% this year, while Huawei's climbs toward 50%, with some estimates putting it as high as 60% by year's end. Remember where this started: 95%. Nvidia's own CEO has now said the company has largely conceded the Chinese market to Huawei, and admitted that in data centers there, Nvidia is simply no longer competitive. That is one of the fastest collapses in the history of the semiconductor industry. It took less than 5 years, and the consequences do not stop at China's border. Huawei has started exporting its AI systems abroad, into markets like South Korea, packing thousands of its chips into single deployments and pitching them as far cheaper than the alternatives. The company is also building its own version of the specialized memory that these chips depend on, closing one of the last gaps where it relied on outside suppliers. Piece by piece, Huawei is assembling a complete AI hardware stack that does not need anything from the United States. And the reason all of this happened traces back to one uncomfortable irony. Here's the part worth sitting with. The ban was meant to stop Huawei. Instead, it may be the single biggest reason Huawei is winning. By cutting China off from Nvidia, the United States did not just slow China down, it cleared the field of Huawei's only real competitor inside the country's own borders, and it gave Beijing every reason to pour support into a domestic champion. A market that Nvidia dominated with 95% share is now one it has largely walked away from, and the vacuum did not stay empty. It got filled by the exact company the policy was designed to contain. Now, none of this means Huawei has beaten Nvidia globally. It is not. Outside China, Nvidia remains the undisputed leader. Its chips are still more advanced, and its software has a decade-long head start that will not vanish overnight. Huawei's approach still burns more power, still leans on brute force, and still depends on factories straining to keep up with demand. This is not a victory lap. It is the emergence of a serious, self-sufficient rival, where the conventional wisdom said one could not exist. The real question is no longer whether China can build competitive AI hardware. It just did. The question is what the rest of the world does now that a sanctions-proof alternative is sitting on the shelf, cheaper, available, and backed by a government that wants to sell it everywhere. Because once that option exists, it rarely stays in one country for long. If this connected some dots for you, hit the like button. It genuinely helps these videos reach more people. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you catch the next deep dive when it drops. And I want to hear from you. Do you think Huawei can turn its lead at home into a real challenge to Nvidia around the world? Or does Nvidia's advantage hold? Let me know in the comments.